The Puppeteer's Wake, an original story by Martha M. C. Jenkins. Chapter 1, Dust and Arrival. The wind that swept through Havenwood wasn't a fresh breeze. It was a sigh, a dry whisper carrying the scent of parched earth and forgotten ambitions. It stirred the dust on Main Street, where the paint peeled from storefronts like sunburnt skin, and the open signs had long since surrendered to closed. Havenwood was dying, not with a bang, but with the slow, agonizing fade of a photograph left too long in the sun. Mayor Thorne knew it better than anyone. He'd seen the last gas station owner pack up, the final teacher drive away, leaving the consolidated schoolhouse a hollow shell. He sat in his office, the town's only remaining hub of activity, staring at ledgers that painted a grim narrative in red ink. Pragmatic and weary, Thorne had long since shed the youthful idealism that once promised Havenwood a brighter future. Now his focus was on keeping the flicker of life from extinguishing entirely. Even a flickering candle could cast a shadow, and shadows, he reasoned, were better than total darkness. It was into this stillness, this quiet desperation, that the cart arrived. Not a truck, not a van, but a magnificent, hand-carved wagon, its wheels groaning under the weight of something unseen. It was pulled by a single, dappled mare with intelligent, almost sorrowful eyes. The wagon itself was a riot of deep purples and golds, embellished with intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer in the afternoon sun. On its side, painted in elegant, archaic script, were the words, "Silas and his marvelous marionettes." A ripple, tiny but perceptible, went through Havenwood. Old Man Hemlock, a fixture of the town's history and its self-imposed recluse, saw it from his porch, hidden behind a curtain of yellowed lace. He'd seen things come and go in Havenwood, but never anything quite like this. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way down his spine. Hemlock remembered tales, old wives' whispers passed down from his grandmother, of traveling shows that brought more than just entertainment. The wagon stopped by the town square, a patch of cracked concrete where a defunct fountain stood testament to grander days. From the driver's seat descended a man, tall and slender, with a shock of raven hair that fell across a high forehead. He moved with a dancer's grace, his long fingers elegant even as he hitched the mare. This was Silas. He was, Thorne observed from his office window, immediately charismatic. A smile, easy and disarming, played on his lips as he surveyed the near-deserted street. His eyes, though, were a deeper story. A profound, almost desperate loneliness simmered within their dark depths, hidden beneath the polished charm. Silas didn't wait for an invitation. He walked straight into the mayor's office, his presence filling the small, dusty room with an unexpected vitality. "Mayor Thorne, I presume?" His voice was a rich baritone, smooth as aged whiskey. "Silas, at your service. My marionettes and I would be honored to perform for your delightful town." Mayor Thorne, accustomed to the slow cadence of Havenwood, blinked. "Delightful. Mr. Silas, Havenwood is quiet." He gestured vaguely at the empty street. Silas chuckled, a sound like rustling silk. "Quiet has its own charm, Mayor. It leaves room for wonder. My show, you see, is all about wonder. And perhaps," he added, his eyes twinkling, "a little bit of life." Thorne, ever the pragmatist, saw a glimmer. "Life? How much do you charge?" Silas spread his hands. "A simple offering, whatever the townsfolk can spare, and a place to perform, perhaps the old bandstand in the square." It was too good to be true. No upfront cost, a promise of entertainment, and perhaps, just perhaps, a reason for a few stray travelers to pause. Thorne, for a moment, allowed himself a flicker of hope. He agreed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues that mimicked the wagon's vibrant colors, Silas began to set up. He worked with an almost reverential care, uncrating wooden figures wrapped in velvet, polishing their painted features. Old Man Hemlock, watching from the deepening shadows, saw that the puppets were not the crude, exaggerated dolls of common fares. These were different. Their faces were carved with an exquisite detail that bordered on the unsettling. Even from a distance, Hemlock felt a strange, cold pull from their unblinking, painted eyes. Too lifelike, he thought. Far, far too lifelike. Chapter 2. The First String. The news of the puppet show spread through Havenwood like a spark in dry tinder. In a town where the most exciting event in a month was the delivery of the new phone book, Silas and his marvelous marionettes was an undeniable novelty. By sundown, a meager but hopeful crowd had gathered in the square. A dozen adults and half a dozen children, perched on overturned buckets or the cracked steps of the bandstand. Mayor Thorne, standing at the back, felt a surge of pride. This was a start. Silas, illuminated by a single flickering lantern he'd hung, cut an imposing figure. He wore tailored black, a velvet waistcoat, and his hands, long and elegant, seemed to shimmer in the low light. With a theatrical flourish, he bowed. "Welcome, my friends, to an evening of magic and illusion." His voice, as before, was a rich, captivating balm, washing over the parched spirits of Havenwood. He introduced his first puppet, a sprightly jester named Fathom, all bells and capers. Fathom danced with an astonishing fluidity, his painted grin seeming to widen with mischievous glee. The children giggled, and even the adults found themselves smiling. But Fathom was just an appetizer. Next came a stately queen, an old sea captain, a farmer with a perpetually furrowed brow. Each puppet was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, their joints moving with an uncanny organic grace. Their expressions, once viewed up close, were unnerving in their precision. The queen's regal frown, the captain's weathered squint, the farmer's weary gaze, they weren't just painted, they seemed to possess emotion. Old Man Hemlock, who had grudgingly joined the others, felt the hair on his arms rise. He remembered his grandmother's stories, tales of carved idols and spirits trapped in wood. He tried to dismiss it as an old man's fancy, but the puppet's eyes, they weren't just glass or painted wood. There was a depth in them, a hint of something observing, something knowing. The highlight of the show was a dramatic ballet performed by two figures, a tragic lover and his lost beloved. Silas manipulated their strings with such dexterity that their wooden bodies seemed to melt into human form. The crowd was utterly mesmerized. The air was thick with rapt attention, the only sounds the rustle of the puppets' costumes and the gentle creak of their strings. It was art, raw and beautiful and horrifyingly real. When the finale came, a grand flourish with all the puppets bowing in unison, the silence was broken by hesitant applause, quickly growing into a genuine ovation. Hope, a fragile thing, had been rekindled in Havenwood. "Thank you, my friends," Silas said, his voice husky with what seemed like genuine emotion. "It is an honor to perform for such an appreciative audience. Until tomorrow evening." The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with a rare animation. Mayor Thorne clasped Silas on the shoulder. "Remarkable, Mr. Silas. Truly remarkable. Never seen anything like it." Silas's smile was warm, but his eyes, in the lantern's dim light, seemed to hold a fleeting sadness. "The show is nothing without its audience, Mayor." The next morning, the buzz continued. People were talking, laughing. Havenwood felt a touch lighter. But then the lightness began to fray. Mrs. Gable, who ran the small general store, noticed it first. Young Timmy Miller, usually the first one through her doors for his morning penny candy, never showed up. His mother, a quiet woman named Sarah, came in around noon, her face pale. "Timmy didn't come home last night, Mrs. Gable. I thought maybe he just snuck out to sleep at the creek, but he wouldn't miss breakfast." A knot of unease began to tighten in Mrs. Gable's stomach. Timmy was a rambunctious boy, but not a runaway. Mayor Thorne was notified. A search party, Havenwood's entire able-bodied population, scoured the small town and its immediate surroundings. They found nothing. No footprints, no discarded toy, no trace of Timmy Miller. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. That evening, as dusk settled, Silas began setting up for his second performance. And there it was, among the familiar array of puppets, nestled carefully beside Fathom the Jester, was a new figure. It was small, crafted with the same exquisite detail as the others. It wore a little denim overall and a striped shirt. Its face, though painted, held the unmistakable mischievous glint of a boy with a missing front tooth. It was Timmy Miller. Uncanny, horrifyingly so. Old Man Hemlock, watching from his window, felt the cold prickle turn into an icy grip around his heart. He knew. He simply knew. Chapter 3. Strings of Fear. A different kind of crowd gathered that night. Smaller, hushed, the children clutching their parents' hands. The excited chatter of the previous evening had been replaced by a suffocating silence, broken only by the mournful cry of a distant owl. Everyone had heard about Timmy Miller. Everyone had, with growing dread, seen the new puppet. Mayor Thorne stood at the edge of the square, his usual weary pragmatism warring with a dawning horror. He tried to rationalize it, a coincidence. Silas was a masterful artist. Perhaps he'd simply created a generic child puppet, and the town's morbid imagination was filling in the blanks. Yet, the way the light caught the painted cheeks, the way the carved hair fell across the forehead, it was too precise, too perfect. Silas, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, or perhaps pretending to be, bowed with his usual fluid grace. "Welcome back, dear friends. Tonight we have a special treat. A new star has joined our company." He introduced the puppet. "This is Pip, our newest little adventurer. Pip, say hello." Silas manipulated the strings, and the puppet Pip bowed deeply, its little head bobbing. Then, with a sudden jerky movement, it spun, its painted eyes seeming to fix on Sarah Miller, Timmy's mother, who stood transfixed, her hand clamped over her mouth. Pip's small wooden arms raised as if reaching before returning to its side. A gasp went through the crowd. Sarah let out a choked sob and fled, her husband following close behind. The rest of the performance was a blur of movement and sound, but the magic had curdled into something sinister. Every flicker of the puppets, every tilt of their heads seemed imbued with a new, unsettling meaning. The lifelike quality was no longer wonderful. It was a grotesque mockery. When Silas took his final bow, there was no applause, only a swift, silent dispersal. Mayor Thorne confronted Silas as he began to pack away his figures. "Mr. Silas, about that new puppet, Pip. It bears a striking resemblance to Timmy Miller." Silas paused, one exquisite hand hovering over a velvet-draped figure. He turned, his dark eyes meeting Thorne's. "Does it, Mayor? Perhaps I have a knack for capturing the essence of childhood. Or perhaps," he added, a cryptic smile playing on his lips, "Havenwood simply has a collective imagination." The loneliness in his eyes seemed to deepen, but his expression remained unreadable. "A good artist draws from life, Mayor." "But Timmy is gone," Thorne insisted, his voice tight. "Disappeared." Silas merely shrugged. "A sad thing indeed, but what has that to do with my art?" He returned to his work, meticulously wrapping each puppet. Thorne left, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this was no coincidence. The next day, no one disappeared. A collective sigh of relief, tenuous and temporary, went through the town. Perhaps it was just a strange, unfortunate accident. Perhaps the puppet was a cruel coincidence. Then, the day after, it was Martha Jenkins. Martha, who ran the town's only cafe, known for her lukewarm coffee and sharp wit. She was a fixture, as predictable as the sunrise. But she didn't open the cafe. Her door remained locked, the closed sign hanging askew. Her neighbor, concerned, peeked in through the window. Martha's purse was on the counter, her keys beside it. Martha, however, was gone. And that evening, another new puppet joined Silas's cast. This one was a matronly figure, a bit stout, with a perpetually pursed lip and a small embroidered apron. Its painted eyes, though still and unblinking, seemed to hold the exact look of exasperated fondness Martha often reserved for Havenwood's less industrious citizens. The crowd that night was even smaller. Thorne was there, grim-faced, along with Old Man Hemlock, whose gaunt face was pale with a terrible knowledge. The remaining townsfolk, their faces etched with fear, stood at a distance, ready to bolt. Silas, however, performed with the same captivating energy, his movements precise, his voice a hypnotic presence. He introduced the Martha puppet as Bertha, our esteemed chef who brings warmth to every stage. Bertha, the puppet, then made a series of surprisingly realistic gestures, wiping an imaginary counter, stirring a pot, even giving a disapproving shake of her wooden head. Hemlock gripped his cane so tightly his knuckles turned white. "He's collecting them," he whispered, though no one was close enough to hear. "Just like the old stories, he's collecting their souls." After the show, Silas looked out at the sparse, terrified gathering. His usual smile faltered, replaced by a subtle downturn of his lips. "It seems," he said, his voice softer than usual, "my audience is shrinking." The loneliness in his eyes was stark now, almost palpable. Perhaps Havenwood is not quite as fond of wonder as I had hoped. Mayor Thorne stepped forward, his resolve hardening. "Mr. Silas," he said, his voice cutting through the oppressive stillness, "this has to stop. People are disappearing, and then they reappear as these." He gestured to the rows of puppets. Silas's gaze sharpened, losing its melancholic edge. "These are my companions, Mayor, my family, if you will, and they are very much alive." He moved towards one of the puppets, his hand gently stroking its wooden head. More alive, perhaps, than the living often are. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What have you done to them? Silas looked at Thorne, his eyes fathomless. I have given them purpose. I have given them an audience. I have given them life anew. Is that not a kindness in a town that offers so little? Chapter 4. Hemlock's Warning. Mayor Thorne found Old Man Hemlock on his porch the next morning, rocking slowly, his eyes fixed on Silas's wagon in the town square. The purple and gold seemed less enchanting now, more garish, like a bruise. "Hemlock," Thorne began, his voice hoarse, "you know something, don't you, about him, about this?" Hemlock nodded slowly, a dry rustle of old bones. "My grandmother used to tell me stories, not bedtime stories, mind you, warnings, about a traveling show that came through other dying towns long ago. Always a puppeteer, always charming, always with puppets too real for comfort." "What did he do?" Thorne asked, his heart pounding a desperate rhythm against his ribs. "He didn't do anything, not in the way you mean," Hemlock rasped, his eyes still on the wagon. "He just was. He spun his tales, and people watched, and then they vanished, and new puppets appeared. The tales said he was lonely, desperately so, said he sought company, beautiful, eternal company, companions who would never leave him." "He turns people into puppets?" Thorne's voice was barely a whisper. The absurd horror of it threatened to overwhelm him. "Not turns them," Hemlock corrected, his voice grave. "He draws out their essence, their spirit, traps it in the wood. The puppets aren't just like them, Mayor. They are them, their souls animating the carved figures, forever bound to his strings, forever performing." Hemlock shuddered. He calls it the puppeteer's wake, the wake for their old lives, and the awakening of their new wooden one. Thorne felt sick. But why? What kind of monster? "He isn't a monster, not in the way we understand it," Hemlock said, his voice laced with an unsettling empathy. "He's just profoundly alone. He doesn't want to harm them. He wants them to stay, to belong to him. And in his performances, he gives them a kind of immortality, a terrifying, beautiful immortality." The pieces clicked into place. Silas's desperate loneliness, the uncanny, lifelike quality, the way he spoke of his companions. He truly believed he was doing them a kindness, giving them new life, a stage, an escape from the slow decay of Havenwood. "We have to stop him," Thorne said, his jaw set. Hemlock sighed. "How? He has no visible strings on them, not until they are puppets. And once they are," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely towards the wagon, "he's powerful, Mayor, not with brute force, but with a different kind of pull, a drawing in." "We can't just let him take everyone," Thorne declared, looking around at the dwindling town. The remaining residents were huddled in their homes, doors locked, windows shuttered. Havenwood, already quiet, was now utterly silent, steeped in a terror that tasted of sawdust and despair. "Tonight will be his last show here," Thorne decided, "one way or another." That evening, the square was empty save for Silas and his puppets. No one dared venture out. Thorne stood alone near his office, watching. He expected Silas to pack up, seeing the lack of an audience. But Silas didn't pack up. He began to set up his stage meticulously, as if preparing for a grand performance before a sold-out house. The lantern light caught the faces of his wooden cast, and Thorne could have sworn he saw them watching him, their painted eyes holding a collective, unblinking judgment. A new puppet was on display. Thorne had heard the whispers that morning. Old Mr. Abernathy, the recluse who owned the hardware store, hadn't been seen. The new puppet was a wizened, stoop-shouldered figure, eternally clutching a miniature wrench. Abernathy. Silas looked out at the empty square, a deep, profound sadness settling on his features. He raised his hands, not to the strings, but to the air itself, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. His voice, clear and resonant, carried across the deserted square. "It seems," Silas began, a tragic quality to his tone, "that Havenwood has chosen silence over spectacle, life over permanence. A pity." He paused, his gaze seeming to sweep over every empty house, every shuttered window. "But the show, dear friends, must go on, for my companions, for those who choose to stay." Then Silas began to perform, not for an audience, but for himself and for his assembled wooden cast. He manipulated the strings with a desperate grace, making the puppets dance and leap, their wooden limbs a flurry of motion. The sound of their footsteps, the rustle of their clothes, echoed eerily in the oppressive stillness. He moved with a frenetic energy, a man possessed by his own loneliness, weaving a story for an absent world. Thorne felt a terrible pull, a strange urge to walk closer, to become part of that solitary, beautiful, horrifying performance. He remembered Silas's initial charm, the way his voice had promised wonder. It was still there, a siren's song tempting him to join the eternal cast. But then Old Man Hemlock appeared beside him, his frail hand gripping Thorne's arm. "Don't," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't go closer. He wants you, Mayor. He wants everyone. He wants his wake to be the last thing Havenwood ever sees." Thorne looked at Hemlock, then back at Silas, who was now dancing with a puppet that bore an uncanny resemblance to the town's former librarian. The sheer tragedy of it, the desperate need for connection, momentarily eclipsed the horror. "We can't let him leave," Thorne said, his voice firm, no longer just weary. "We can't let him take this to another town." Chapter 5. The Final Curtain. The air crackled with the strange electricity of Silas's solo performance. The puppets moved with an almost frantic energy, a silent play for an invisible audience. Silas's movements were fluid, his face a mask of profound, aching loneliness. He wasn't just a puppeteer, he was part of the performance, a conductor and a dancer, weaving the destinies as his wooden companions. "He'll try to leave before dawn," Hemlock rasped, his eyes fixed on Silas. "They always do. Take their show to fresh soil." Thorne knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight Silas with fists. The puppeteer's power was insidious, a charm that stole souls without a touch. But he could end the performance. He could cut the strings. Together, Thorne and Hemlock moved, their footsteps muffled by the dust. As they approached the bandstand, Silas paused his intricate dance. His head snapped up, his dark eyes locking onto Thorne and Hemlock. A flicker of something, recognition, despair, crossed his face. "Ah," Silas said, his voice devoid of its usual charm, now just a flat, weary tone. the last of the living. Have you finally come to join the play, Mayor? To find your eternal role? He gestured to the rows of puppets, his companions. There is still room, you know. Always room for more in my company. No more, Silas, Thorne said, his voice firm. This ends here. You can't keep doing this. Silas's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Doing what, Mayor? Bringing people together? Giving them purpose? Look at them. He swept his hand over the wooden figures. Are they not beautiful? Are they not still here, performing for me, for each other? They are not forgotten in the dust, like so many others in this town. They live. They live as prisoners, Hemlock interjected, his voice trembling but resolute. Their souls trapped, their wills bound to your strings. Silas's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger crossing the deep loneliness. Bound? No. Released. Released from the decay of the flesh, from the quiet desperation of a dying world. Here they are vibrant. Here they are eternal. This is not a prison, old man. It is a stage, and they are the stars. His hand went to a puppet, a small child with wide painted eyes, Timmy Miller. Pip loves to dance, don't you, Pip? With a jolt, the Timmy puppet twirled, a quick, joyful spin that was uncannily similar to the boy's living movements. Thorne felt a cold wave of horror, solidified by a terrible certainty. Hemlock was right. These weren't just resemblances. You're wrong, Silas, Thorne said, desperation fueling his words. They don't want this. They want their lives back. They want to be free. Free? Silas laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. Free to wither? Free to fade? No, Mayor. They are free with me. Free to never truly die. He shifted his stance. But if you insist on interrupting our eternal performance... Silas raised his hands, not to the puppet strings, but towards Thorne and Hemlock. A strange, shimmering energy seemed to pulse from his fingertips, an invisible tether reaching out. Thorne felt a sudden, profound lassitude, a heavy emptiness that threatened to drain him of all will. His limbs felt heavy, his mind foggy, as if the life force was being siphoned from him. He saw Hemlock struggle too, his eyes glazing over. Join us, Mayor, Silas's voice purred, losing its human quality, becoming something ancient and seductive. Join my company. You can be the valiant leader, forever protecting your little town. It would be a fitting role. Thorne fought against the creeping paralysis, the urge to surrender. He looked at the row of puppets, their unblinking eyes forever fixed in their last expression. He saw Martha, forever serving lukewarm coffee. He saw Abernathy, forever clutching his wrench. He saw Timmy, forever a playful, silent child. And he thought of Havenwood, his dying town. If he joined them, Havenwood would truly be gone, its last guardian a wooden figure on a stage. With a surge of desperate will, Thorne broke through the haze. He lunged forward, not at Silas, but at the lantern that illuminated the stage. With a swift, clumsy motion, he knocked it over. Darkness. The sudden, absolute blackness was a shock. The shimmering energy emanating from Silas faltered. The puppets, momentarily deprived of their eerie glow, seemed to become just wood. In the ensuing chaos, Thorne heard Hemlock cry out. Silas, disturbed, let out a frustrated hiss. Thorne scrabbled on the ground, his fingers closing around a forgotten shovel leaning against the bandstand. He didn't know if it would work, if any physical object could defeat Silas's unseen power, but he had to try. He swung the shovel wildly, aiming for the puppeteer's hands, his source of power. He heard a sharp crack, followed by a choked cry of pain. Then, silence. Thorne waited, his heart hammering. He relit the lantern. Silas lay slumped on the stage, his long, elegant fingers curled, one hand twisted at an unnatural angle. He looked frail, almost broken. The charismatic light had dimmed, replaced by a profound, vacant stillness. His eyes, once so full of desperate loneliness, were now wide and empty, staring up at the pre-dawn sky. The puppets stood frozen, their strings hanging slack. They were just wood now, their painted faces no longer possessing that terrifying spark of life. Timmy, Martha, Abernathy, they were mere dolls, beautifully crafted, but utterly inert. Hemlock approached, his face pale but resolute. He looked at Silas, then at the lifeless puppets. "You broke his connection," he whispered, his voice full of a strange mix of relief and sorrow. "He drew their essence. If his physical link is severed, the magic, it fades." Thorne looked at the still form of Silas, then at the row of silent puppets. "Are they released?" Hemlock shook his head slowly. "Their essence was bound. Without him, their prison remains, but their animator is gone. They will not dance again." He paused, "and neither will he." The sun began to rise, painting the sky with the same fiery hues that had welcomed Silas and his wagon. The dust, disturbed by their struggle, settled once more over Havenwood. The silence returned, deeper now, heavier. The puppet show was over. The puppeteer's wake had ended, leaving behind an empty stage, broken strings, and a profound, aching stillness. Havenwood was still dying, perhaps even more so now, but its remaining few souls, though scarred by the horrifying show, were finally, irrevocably their own. The puppets stood as a grim memorial, a beautiful, terrible testament to a lonely man's desperate attempt to build a family from stolen souls, and the town that almost became his eternal plaything. The dusty silence of Havenwood now held the weight of a new, unsettling legend, a quiet reminder that sometimes the greatest loneliness can weave the most beautiful and the most horrifying of dreams. My friends, I hoped you enjoyed this story. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did. Until next time, my love to you all, Martha.